Hello, dear friends and adventurers. It's Rob, the D&D wannabe, here with some exciting news. This podcast is now made possible in partnership with our good friends at Misty Mountain Gaming. Veteran-owned and operated, Misty Mountain is one of the largest dice companies in the world. They offer the widest selection of metal, gemstone, and glass dice combined for yourself, that special role player in your life, or your favorite podcast hosts. Just saying. Look for their booth at your next local comic, anime, or gaming convention, or find their products at mistymountaingaming.com. Okay, on with the show. Okay, that's a wrap. Episode done. Hey, thanks for recording with me tonight, man.
Oh yeah, no problem. Anytime, man.
So before you go, should we figure out what you want to discuss for the next episode?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a little, actually.
Because I was thinking maybe we go into creating custom backgrounds for player characters, or maybe take a look at how I created the Shield Maiden fighter subclass. Yeah, all those things sound great. Or I'm thinking this would be a great time for me to talk about my obsession with feats. Your what?
Obsession, man. I love feats. I feel like we don't talk about them enough. I know not everyone is super into them, but I can't get enough of them. Whenever we play D&D, I'm always thinking about feats. I mean, I like them all, even the unbalanced ones.
Really?
Absolutely, man. When we start a campaign, the first question I'm asking the DM is whether or not he likes feats too. Then if he does, I stay up late, night after night, looking at feats online, trying to find out which ones work best for me and which ones I think would go great with my character.
I mean, I knew you put a lot of thought into your characters, but you obviously go into a lot more detail than I thought you did.
Man, it's just one of my favorite parts of this whole process. It really helps me connect with the character. It makes them feel more unique and makes the roleplay more interesting. You know how much I like roleplay.
Yeah, clearly more than I knew. Hey, have you talked to your wife about all this?
Are you kidding me? She just tunes out whenever I start talking about this stuff, man. She has no idea what feats do for me or how much they enrich the fantasy for me.
Okay, I do not need to know about your fantasies.
Okay, fair enough. But we're in agreement then, so we'll be talking about the best and worst feats in all of D&D?
Okay, if you're sure you want to dedicate an entire episode to this?
Yeah, it's going to be great.
All right, I will do some research.
2 weeks later.
So the Behir is my number 5 pick for best feat in D&D. They basically have dragon legs and claws, just more of them, which I think is cool. And then the Yuan Ti Malison Type 3 would be my 5th worst, just because it doesn't have feet, having a serpentine lower body. What do you think, Steve?
I think we may need to go back to the drawing board for this one. You and I may need to have a talk. Welcome back, friends and adventurers, to another episode of Bardic Twinspiration. We have not recorded in quite a while, but we are excited to be back in the saddle and bringing you yet another conversation between myself, Steven, and my brother, the D&D wannabe.
Hey, it's Rob. We're back. We're talking about D&D again like we haven't done in a while. And man, it was a good thing that we had a couple episodes in the pocket before everybody got sick and the holidays were coming up.
Yeah, and your job, you have been on the road a lot. for Misty Mountain Gaming recently, which is fantastic. It's given you the opportunity to meet a lot of people at various conventions. It's given you the opportunity to travel, which has been great, but it has made recording a little bit more difficult. So yeah, good thing we were ahead.
Yeah, we spent all this money on a decent recording setup, and I don't really want to record without it.
Then we immediately, I got my room finished, you got your room finished, and then we immediately shut down for the better part of 2 months. But we are back. Rob and I have had our little conversation and clarified the actual topic that we're going to be covering this week.
Yeah, sorry. I could have sworn you said... Anyway, never mind. It's not important.
Well, what did you think I meant?
It's not important. We're just going to talk about feats.
Okay.
Feats.
So, on the subject of feats, what are they?
So, feats are an aspect of the game that goes all the way back to 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons. In 5th edition, currently, they are an optional rule, something that may or may not be in effect at your table, but I feel like it's a pretty common optional rule.
Yeah, I think that this is probably the most commonly utilized and accepted of the rules that are specifically mentioned as optional, like more so than multi-classing, more so than using all of the extra supplementary books that are have been put out by Wizards of the Coast, because feats are mentioned in the player's handbook.
Right.
Which is most people's go-to introductory book, and if they're listed in there, then they're fair game, right?
Sure. And I mean, even over inspiration and flanking, this is one of the core optional rules. Anytime, as your character progresses in levels, that they would be able to take an ability score improvement, or an ASI, as we will probably be referring to them for the rest of the episode, you could instead choose to take a feat. Instead of improving your ability scores, which affect many different numbers on your character sheet, you could instead choose to take some superpower, some ability, some special talent that sets you apart from the rest of the adventurers out there and lets you bend and even break the rules of the game.
Right. These ability score increases that you are foregoing in order to pick up a feat would normally come at 4th, 8th, 12th, 16th, and 19th level, meaning that most characters going up to level 20 should have the opportunity to get around 5. Now, notably, you can get more if you use some optional rules like the variant human ancestry, or if you play a fighter, because they get ability score increases more often as part of their class features.
Double the feats, actually. But that's kind of the point of fighters, and it sort of always has been since 3rd edition, is that they get to do things that no one else can do because they can't do the things that other people can do. They can't cast spells or have animal companions or sneak attack, but they can break some rules.
And fighters in particular are a great candidate to receive feats as well, because there are a lot of feats that are going to be generically good regardless of what class you take and what their particular fighting style is. But we have noticed a trend in which non-magical fighters, be they ranged or melee, have a lot more combat feats that augment their playstyle. It really makes that whole variant human fighter just a incredibly feat-dense build, and it's one of the reasons that is so popular.
Yeah, who doesn't like a good feat, you know?
The thing is, if you want to change the way that your spellcaster behaves in combat, you just repick some spells. Spellcasters in particular really want to be increasing their spell DC, so they, I feel like, are a little bit more incentivized to be taking those ability score increases. But martial classes, in particular fighters, really benefit from the wealth of augmentations that these feats will provide.
So there are a lot of feats in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Some in the Player's Handbook, or Xanathar's Guide to Everything, or Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, or some other sources. And we wanted to discuss and compare some of our favorites and least favorites. And we have not discussed this going in. I don't know what all of Steve's favorites are, or his least favorites are, and I expect that I'm going to get angry about some of them.
We have done as little discussion about this as possible. Basically, we got together to say, hey, did you get your list together? Yes. Did you get your list together? Oh, and you had this one on it, right? What? No. Are you kidding me? Really? You put that one in your good list? And then we immediately stopped because we realized that this was going to be a contentious episode.
And we want you to enjoy every contentious second.
But before we get into like which ones we think are the best and which ones we think are the worst, let's just talk a little bit about why feats are important. We had this little joking intro where we talked about how much I'm into feats. But guys, in all seriousness, I am really into feats.
See, I hear it now.
There you go. Good. Mm-hmm. My level 4 feat choice, and I invariably take a feat at level 4, is one of the first things that I decide when I'm making a character. Sometimes I pick it before my class. It's really something that a character can be built around, in addition to just augmenting a character. The sorcerer that I brought into Rob's current campaign in Arelay was actually built around the concept of being a battlefield controller who used the telekinetic feat to reposition people. If you haven't heard of the telekinetic feat, then maybe we'll talk about it in this episode. Maybe we won't. Definitely worth looking up. But again, to reiterate, I built my whole character around the concept of using this feat. It was integral to his design, and that was one of the things that made me really excited to play him.
On the other hand, I typically try and get an ability score up to at least an 18 before I start looking at feats. Hopefully I've got that squared away before level 4, because much like you, I'm usually in a hurry to get my first feat. The thing that I like best about feats is, much like with Salem in our campaign together, they really can define a character. I like playing characters that have a niche, that when you need X done, you gotta come to me, because there is nobody who does X like me. And feats give you those niches. When you assemble the A-team, you want Face, the guy who knows how to talk himself into and out of every situation, the con man, the guy in the disguise. But you also need B.A. Baracus there to drive you in and out of trouble and to break things along the way. And you always got to have Hannibal back there making a plan. And feats, more so than the ability scores or the class that you play, define your role in the party and in the story to a great extent.
Here's what makes feats really interesting to me, is the fact that you and I could both roll up human fighters or tiefling warlocks or dwarf clerics. We could even take the same subclass options. But through our roleplay and our feat selections, they can behave very differently in and out of combat. It's not limited to spell selection. It's not limited to class. It is not limited to your ancestry. It's something that is mechanically separating you from the other members of your party and allowing you to function in an entirely unique way. And notably, most feats are not tied to races and or classes or ability scores. I mean, there are some that have prerequisites, but by and large, you can take most feats as any character to adjust or enhance the way that they behave and make this concept of your character that you have in your head really translate on paper.
Yeah, feats are for everyone, except when they're not. And I'll tip my hand a little bit here. None of my favorite feats are restricted by race.
Ooh, hey, that's a good point. We should probably go ahead and lay out our qualifications. Because anytime that you have a list, it has to have some sort of context, right? So, Rob, how did you evaluate your top 5 and your bottom 5?
Objectively. Yep. I've only brought in the absolute top tier 5 feats. Bar none, no argument, no.
No bias whatsoever. Why did I bother making a list? You've already made yours, right?
Yeah, exactly. No, so when I was looking through the list of all of the feats on D&D Beyond, not a sponsor, for which ones would make the cut or not, my rule of thumb is kind of what we were discussing a moment ago. I want a feat that defines a character. that solidifies a character concept that gives me a superpower, that makes me that guy. So, feats that put my character in a particular niche are going to make my top 5. Also, ones that are practically required to play a certain character type. Things that I can't see myself playing this class or using this weapon or being this type of character without this feat are going to be included on my list.
And how about your bottom 5? What really made something just sink to the dregs of the published content for you?
So for my bottom 5, I'm actually looking at it from a little bit more of a mechanical perspective, because you can roleplay almost any feat well, and you can be almost any guy with any feat. But there are certain feats that just seem mechanically redundant or ineffective or worse than an ability score improvement. You only get so many chances to take a feat or improve your ability scores as you level up a character. And if 9 out of 10 times I would rather take the ability score improvement, that feat is going on my bottom 5. Also, if a feat is just giving me abilities that I could otherwise get by multi-classing, I'm probably going to chuck it down there too.
Yeah, that was a big one for me too. Like, if I can gain this feat by taking a level in my primary class, or I could take a level in a secondary class and get something similar or better, it pretty much ruled the feat out for me entirely.
Now, I recognize that this particular criteria is thrown out the window if you're really looking forward to your capstone ability, that thing that your class gets at level 20. But have you ever gotten there with one of your characters?
Never have, probably never will.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at too.
Yeah, I played in one level 20 one-shot that was really fun, but in no campaign am I actually doing this.
And when you know you're level 20, you know what the stakes are, and you can take that capstone or not.
Right. When you're level 20, you can choose everything about your character. I'm mostly viewing this from the perspective that I normally have, which is I am playing in an ongoing campaign, and I have gained enough experience in order to level up, or I have reached the coming milestone. And now I am presented with the option of, do I take an ASI or do I take a feat? And to your point, a feat has to win out over that ASI for me to consider taking it, and also has to beat out that multiclass, because I multiclass frequently. Salem is, I think, the only character that has not been multiclassed since my very first one.
You and I do not share that. I like playing my archetypes.
And I like breaking the game.
But you get to play more often than me, so...
For me, my qualifications were, I think that ASIs are good. They are mechanically beneficial, and you can make your character even better at the stuff that they are already good at. So, generally speaking, I like my characters to be better at more things, and that's why feats are more attractive to me. But there's this concept of half feats, which is, I think, probably a bad way to describe it, but the internet has decided, so here we are. A half feat is a feat which gives you not just this cool new feature and trait and ability that you get from taking it, but also it gives you a single ability score increase where normally you would get 2. So it's called a half feat because it's really more of a half ASI with an ability
with a little
tagged
feat
onto
thrown
it.
in.
Yeah, exactly. But, an ASI is pretty good. So if I can take that 1 point and use it to bump me up to that next bonus to my charisma, intelligence, constitution, what have you, then that has some worth. So when I was evaluating my bottom 5, I made sure that there were no quote-unquote half feats represented there, because there are plenty of terrible feats that do not give you any sort of ability score increase. And I think the fact that it does have that 1 point to one of your primary attributes means that it cannot be on the bottom 5 for me.
Actually, I was about to agree with you, and then I realized that one of my bottom ones does have a +1.
You just think it's that bad, huh?
I don't like it.
It's okay. I will tell you why you're wrong and why that one of these other ones is actually worse. And it's
Oh.
I'm probably just going to come back to this point and tell you to listen to this part of the episode again, where I tell you that point increases to your attributes matter.
All right. Well, let's not delay the arguing any longer then.
All right. So the way that we're going to do this is we're going to go back and forth talking about the feats that we like and the feats that we don't. We're not going to go in any particular order. So with that being said, I'm going to start with what I think is the de facto best feat for any character. Now, that is not to say that I think it is the best feat for certain builds. We'll get to that later. But I would argue that any character in the game can benefit from the lucky feat. Surprise, surprise. I'm sure this one's on your list too.
I very intentionally left lucky off my list.
Because it's not good?
Because it's not one of my favorites. Because...
Oh, I didn't know we were doing favorites. I thought we were doing the best ones.
Well, here's the thing. Again, going back to my criteria, this is not a feat that people tend to roleplay. It's one that at some point I will look forward to roleplaying. I have a very interesting character concept that I may or may not have already discussed with you. If not, hang out after the episode. But as opposed to some other feats, like the Great Weapon Master, you're the Great Weapon Master. That's you. Mm-hmm. Versus people who take the lucky feat are typically just tending to try and reverse their fortunes, to try and avoid a bad thing happening to them.
I can already see where our lists are going to diverge heavily. Because I picked the ones that, pardon my French here, I picked the ones that mechanically kicked the most ass. So if you're picking the ones that are the highest in flavor, we're going to have some very different lists, which is okay.
Yeah.
So since we've already been talking about it for a minute and a half and no one knows what it is, the lucky feat says that your character has inexplicable luck that seems to kick in at just the right moment. Mechanically, you have 3 luck points, which, when spent, will allow you to re-roll a d20 used for an attack roll, ability check, or saving throw. Notably, you make this decision after you have already rolled it, which makes it better than inspiration, because inspiration, for one, usually has to be called before the roll is made in order to generate advantage. But in this case, with the lucky feat, you can use it after you've seen the result. You can wait until you think you're going to fail in order to use it. Also notably, the lucky feat cancels out disadvantage, because once again, you don't make the decision to spend your point until you have seen the result of your disadvantage, and then you select between the lucky die that you just rolled and the result of your disadvantage, almost always picking the second result. Notably, lucky gets even better by allowing you to roll a d20 and apply the result when an attack is made against you, effectively giving an enemy disadvantage, but it's even better than that because now you're imposing disadvantage whether or not they started with advantage. Normally speaking, when you have advantage and disadvantage, they would cancel each other out and become a flat d20 roll, but the lucky feat allows you 3 times per long rest to completely ignore that rule and become the master of advantage and disadvantage whenever you want after you've seen the results. The power that represents is just insane. The fact that you can only do it 3 times, I don't feel like is that limiting, because once again, you're doing it after you've seen the results. You probably know whether or not this saving throw is critical. Basically, advantage and disadvantage don't apply to you anymore. You are just the god of d20s for 3 times per long rest, and only when you decide and when you know it's going to matter. So good. So powerful. Most of you probably saw this coming.
Yeah, I'm not here to debate that lucky is not a powerful feat. In fact, even at tables that permit feats, lucky is sometimes off the table, because dungeon masters like allowing fate to determine the outcomes of particular endeavors, rolls, and saving throws, and they feel that allowing the players to roll more or to intervene in that process is cheating. I do not feel that way. It's just dice. It's a random number generator. Rolling more numbers, it doesn't really offend me. And 3 times per day? That's not bad. There's all kinds of abilities in the game that grant advantage and disadvantage, and allow people to reroll things, or Bardic Inspiration that adds to rolls, or Guidance that adds to rolls, or Enhance Ability, which allows you to have advantage on particular things. I'm not scared of rolling dice. It's just not so incredible to me that I feel like I have to take it. And I don't think it informs anything about my character.
Yeah, and honestly, I never see it utilized that way either. Like, I know that Lucky got a lot of attention, as if it needed more, when Vax took it in Critical Role Campaign 1, and he used it to re-roll a lot of stuff. I didn't see him role-playing any of that. There was no discussion about, what changed when he decided to use it. It's just he got to re-roll.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's my main thing with Lucky, is that it's rarely, if ever, and I am welcoming anyone to correct me on this, and at some point I intend to correct this in my own campaigns, but rarely is it the character taking the feat. It's usually the player taking the feat, and it's usually coming from a place of fear.
I get where you're coming from there. Now, because I went for the feats that I thought were the most mechanically impressive, I can't avoid it. It's got to be here.
Yeah.
I think the reason a lot of dungeon masters, are not crazy about it, and the reason that a lot of players are, is that you basically get to ignore disadvantage and advantage, which are things that are imposed or created by the dungeon master in order to make things a little bit more realistic and compelling, where you are good at the things that you're supposed to be good at, and you're bad at the things that you're not supposed to be good at, based on the situation that you're in. And Lucky just allows you to ignore that. And I get that it's not thematic, and I get that it's not a big role play opportunity like some of these feats are. It's just good. It's just really good. And that's why it's here.
Like I said, I'm more coming from a standpoint of defending myself for not including it in my top 5 than telling you that you're wrong for putting it in there. I'm sure you will come up with a real stinker in your top 5, and I'll fight you on that one. But no, I just don't think it belongs in mine, especially coming from the perspective with which you made your list. Lucky deserves to be in the conversation.
Coming from the perspective that you're using, I don't think I'm going to argue with you too much on these, because we just started from such different places. If you're picking ones that are based on theme and that you can really build a character around, I'm probably not going to argue very much. We're probably just going to argue on my list. So anyway, with that in mind, what did you put on your top 5?
So I have very rarely built a character that I was going to be role-playing for an extended period of time that did not take this next feat. It's one of what you called a half feat. It does give you an ability score improvement to a particular ability score, but that doesn't figure into it. With or without the ability score improvement, I would still take this feat.
Are you waiting for me to do a drum roll?
No. I'm just trying to build some dramatic tension. Come on, man. Is the actor feat.
Whoa, this is the one that when you told me this was going to be on your list, I'm like, we have to stop talking right now. Because I have heard of actor being put on many people's bottom list, like the bottom of the barrel. Obviously,
Ooh.
Like I said, it's not on mine. Oh, easy boy, down boy. It's not on mine because it's a half feat. And like I said, a half feat has a certain intrinsic value. Like the floor on a half feat is just higher than it is on anything else. Let's talk about what actor does so that we can discuss it more fully.
All right. Just the Cliff Notes version, you get a +1 to your charisma. That is pretty huge. Charisma is the casting stat for sorcerers, warlocks, and bards, and paladins. So 4 of your classes love this stat.
Yeah, the best ones, too. So there's that.
I mean, matter of opinion, but I frankly am of that opinion. So yeah, I agree. Because, like I said, bards use charisma. It's also one of the most fun ability scores to roleplay. If you're going to be the face, if you're going to be the con man, if you're going to be the liar or the muscle who intimidates people, charisma is huge. Furthermore, you get advantage on charisma deception and charisma performance checks you make to pass yourself off as a different person. Which, let's face it, loving rogues and bards like I do that a good bit. And those are 2 skill checks that I make fairly often. No other feat hands me advantage on 2 skills every time I roll them. So, to me, who enjoys being good at things, that's huge. Furthermore, and this is a big clincher for me, if you listen to another creature talk for a single minute, not even in conversation with you, just if you can hear it, you can perfectly mimic their speech. It takes a successful check contested by your deception, which, let's recap, you have advantage on every time you try and use it now, for someone to determine that it's not the original speaker. And in combat scenarios and out of combat scenarios, that check takes an action, and they have to have a reason to take that action, much like investigating whether or not an illusion is real. So, if you want to impersonate someone, to replace someone, to be someone's body double, to sneak into a place, or to just cause a great distraction, this feat is incredible. How can you not love this feat?
Yeah, I can see where you're going with this one, and I can specifically see why this one really appeals to you. But I do feel like it's a little niche. Like, I'm not saying that I don't like the actor feat. I'm pretty sure that I've taken it at some point in the past. But the applications for this take a lot of setup, I feel like. I mean, yes, there are certain situations that I can think of, and I'm sure you've thought of at least 2 or 3 times more, if this has made it into your top 5, where you can impersonate the captain of the guard to get those guys to leave you alone, or you can impersonate the enemy lieutenant in order to redeploy some forces away from the place that you're trying to sneak into. Or maybe you can impersonate a noble in order to gain access to an area that would otherwise be restricted to you. But it just takes a lot of setup, and I feel like this feat can be used to bypass almost entirely several different types of encounters. But you also might be in a game where it is extremely difficult to use this, or it just doesn't come up at all.
I think with a lot of feats, it's going to be that way. Feats are powers. They're things on your character sheet, and they're only as useful as you make them. And yes, it may be a bit niche, but we already said that's kind of what I'm going for here. If I'm going to play the face, the con man, the entertainer, or the infiltrator, I want this feat. And it pairs so nicely with other aspects of the game. Think of coupling this feat with a disguise kit, or better yet, with the disguise self spell. I make myself appear for all the world like the king of the realm. My party detains him in another room. I have listened to his cries for help. I know his speech patterns, his vocal intonations, and where his pitch is. Disguised to look magically like him, and moving as he moves, with my advantage on my performance and deception checks, and sounding for all the world just like this very important public figure, I step into the king's courtroom and pass judgment on my enemies, spare the lives of my friends. Or, if I couple this with being a changeling, I can just remain king of the realm for the rest of my life.
Yep, there are some really great ways to use this, and coming from your perspective, where you build a character concept around it, I think it really reinforces that character concept and allows you to do some things that would be extremely difficult without this feat. So, like I said, I'm not really prepared to argue with you on this point. It just was not one I even considered for my top 5.
A lot of the feats, as we continue to go down my list, you may find that I like feats that make me very good at one thing. That every time I attempt it, I'm probably going to succeed. That I'm always going to be that guy. And yeah, with the actor feat, I can be the infiltrator. I can be the imposter. And since I don't play as often, a lot of my bad guys have this feat.
I wonder how many of these are just going to be bard feats on your list.
Let's really quick have a look.
Also, I wonder if that's your criteria. Like, do you have any combat feats on your list?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yes, I do. You can be the combat guy. You can be the melee guy. You can be the ranged guy. You can be the magic guy.
Okay.
You'll see. We'll get there.
Okay. Let's take a break for a minute from talking about the things we like and talk about the things we hate.
Okay, so again, not all feats are great, and some of my least favorites are ones that I think have very limited or redundant mechanical implications to the game. And so, one of my very least favorite feats in the game is Charger.
Yeah, man, that one almost made my list too.
No, but Rob, you say, what if I want to be the charging guy? We'll see that some of my favorite feats have at the end, like I am the actor, or the charger, or the great weapon master.
Or the lucky
No. What if I want to be the charging guy? Well, if you want to be the charging guy, don't take this feat.
It doesn't help you that much.
So, here's what Charger does.
Yeah, it's because it's got a lot of setup for not a lot of benefit.
When you have the feat, anytime that you use your action, that thing you get one of per turn.
Yep. Your biggest resource.
To dash, doing the thing that your movement is already there for, you can use your bonus action, a second part of your turn, to make one melee weapon attack, or to shove a creature.
Okay, before we move on, I feel like we need to deal with this. So, in order to use the Charger feat, you have to use every available resource on your turn. Because the dash action involves your movement, and then you are also spending your bonus action. And by the way, if you wanted to move and make an attack, couldn't you just move and then use your action to make an attack better than you otherwise could with this feat, and then still have your bonus action left over?
We'll get there.
Okay, all right.
Hold your horses.
Because I know that if you attack with your bonus action, you don't get extra attacks, but if you attack with your action, you do.
So after all that, you also must move at least 10 feet in a straight line before taking this bonus action.
Oh, man.
So depending on the terrain and the layout of the battlefield, this might not even apply.
Right, and you can't use it on anyone that you're next to, which is very often going to happen.
Let me get there.
Okay.
They don't even know what the feat does yet. Can we tell them what the feat does before we bitch about it?
You can cut all my stuff out if you want to. I'll put it in a second.
You have to move at least 10 feet in a straight line immediately before taking a bonus action to make your one melee attack, and then you can choose to either gain +5 to that one attack's damage, or to push the target up to 10 feet away from you, if you choose to shove and succeed on that athletics check.
Wow, this is a lot.
It is a lot. Your movement is only good for moving you around the battlefield. That's all that movement ever does for you. Now you're using your action, and by the way, it does not work for rogues who can dash as their bonus action. The feat requires your action to be used making the dash action. Then you have to move 10 feet in a straight line. Then you will either get +5 to the damage or push them 5 more feet than you normally would with a shove action. Okay.
Oh, man. I'm just going to assume that you cut out all of the griping and the concern that was coming from me while you were trying to explain what the feat does. You start, and I'll be happy to fill in the gaps, because this has the most requirements for some of the least benefit out of anything on the list. It just barely didn't make my list. If I had had 6, this would have been on there, hands down.
So, here's the perspective that I'm coming from. Who wants this feat?
It sounds like something that would be great for, a big melee fighter, like a barbarian or a paladin. I don't know, maybe a fighter, or I don't know, I could see maybe a druid taking this if they wanted to use it exclusively when they were a bear or a T-Rex, but not a lot of people, and they're mostly upfront bruisers.
Yeah, martial melee classes who are trying to get into the thick of things. Because if you're one of them squishies, why are you running in? Why are you charging in?
Right.
So, let's pretend that this is a best case scenario. A fighter wants this feat with one of the many ability score improvements that a fighter would get.
Yeah. Well, I've got so many feats now, I don't know what to take next. I guess I could take Charger, or I could kill myself.
So, this sounds very useful for that first turn, getting into the fight. If you are just a little bit too far away from the fight, This gives you the opportunity, instead of just double moving to get into melee with something, you can take the dash action and then do something when you get there. On paper, that sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
But then what? I just charged into the thick of everything. Everybody else gets a turn before my turn comes back around. The enemy collapses on me. Now I can't really go anywhere. Maybe I'm completely ringed in. Maybe I can go somewhere, but I'm going to take how many attacks of opportunity in doing so? Maybe I could disengage, but then I burned that turn. Also that I could back up a little bit more, maybe, and then charge again. How often in a fight do you see this coming up? Is it going to happen more than once a fight? I don't think so. Especially as a fighter, or a paladin, or a barbarian, who can use their action to make multiple attacks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That measly +5 to a single hit is quickly overshadowed by the ability to strike again.
Yeah. Let me see if I can break down some of my problems that I have with this feat. I think at most, in an ideal battlefield, you may be able to use this twice. But even when you have the opportunity to use it, I don't think you should. The specific scenario that you just described is the only one where I could see this being mechanically beneficial. But most of the time, as that martial melee bruiser, you are going to be within 5 feet of someone. And that pretty much makes this whole feat ineffective. Anytime that you are inside of 30 feet away from someone, then you're going to be best served by just walking up to them and using your attack action, because, like you said, the classes that would want this feat are the ones that get extra attacks. So the only time I could see you using this is if you were more than your speed away from someone.
Right.
And then you're willing to give up your whole stinking turn to make this attack.
For either 10 feet or 5 damage.
Right. I mean, a lot of those classes, like, say, paladins, they've got a lot of bonus action spells that they could cast.
Yeah, all of the smites except Divine Smite.
Yeah, I think I would rather do that, or, cast a buff spell or something, than, try to make a single melee attack with my turn just to get a +5 or to shove, which you still have to roll for the shove.
Yeah, you could fail. You could suck at it. And not just paladins, fighters might have that offhand attack for their bonus action. They might have Second Wind or a class feature that needs to be activated. Barbarians might want to rage. That takes a bonus action. Or if they're frenzied ranging, they might want to make that extra attack with the bonus action every turn. Really, just once, maybe, per fight.
Right. Also, notably, you have to either make a melee attack or shove them. If it said and, I would reevaluate this feat. And I might say that it is a extremely niche option for doing a particular thing, but the fact that you are choosing to attack or shove them is just really the crap icing on the poo cake.
And let's take the shove for a second. Let's say again that I'm that fighter who has used one of his many ASIs to take this feat, and I need to shove a frost giant into a river of lava that he's 10 feet away from. I could use the charger feat and make a single attempt, or for each of my attacks, in my extra attacks, if I take the attack action, I could substitute one of them to be a shove. I could have that one try with no advantages and potentially fail, or I could try and shove the guy 4 times and knock him 20 feet back.
Right. This feels like it's just to give you the opportunity to do something when you're approaching someone who is outside of your normal range. And I admit that it does feel bad sometimes to use your action to dash, get right up next to an enemy, and then do nothing. But
it doesn't feel so bad that you want this feat.
There's just so many better things that you could do. Like the ASI is better than this, and there are so many more feats, especially on my list, that would serve this build better. And the fact that you have to move 10 feet in a straight line, not just 10 feet, it's just so limiting. The most restrictive conditions in order to use it to receive some of the least benefit.
Okay, I could continue to whine about this feat, but I would probably start repeating myself pretty quickly. It's terrible. I think it's so terrible. What do you think is so terrible?
Okay, so the first one that I have listed here, again, no particular order, on my worst overall feats is Dungeon Delver. You see that? You see how I didn't build any suspense or anything like that? I just dropped it in there. I said Dungeon Delver is the one. Yes, Dungeon Delver.
So, before you get into it...
is this one of your top 5?
No.
Okay, so obviously you don't think it's that good.
But one of the members of our Discord, Justice, who is a longtime friend of mine, and who actually introduced me to Dungeons & Dragons years ago, and I were driving back from Chicago the night before we recorded this, and we were making a list of our top 5 generic feats for any character or any class or any race to take. And this feat was in the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I don't at all think this is bottom 5 feat material, but let's see you convince me.
You know, I may not, because the more we talked about Charger and the fact that it said or, which I did not previously realize, probably makes that one worse than Dungeon Delver for me. And if I stop and think about it, I may have to admit that I don't view Dungeon Delver as valuable because of some of the campaigns that I've been in. A lot of my campaigns involve a lot of overland travel, a lot of social interaction, and fairly straightforward combat. I don't play in the campaign that has a lot of dungeon crawls, and when I do enter a dungeon, I'm usually not finding that many traps, and when I do find traps, the damage isn't that bad. Okay, you know what? Maybe I should talk about what the Dungeon Delver feat actually does. Okay, this is for the player who wants to be particularly aware of hidden traps and secret doors that might be around them in the dungeon. So, this character will have advantage on perception and investigation checks made to detect the presence of secret doors. Notably, not traps and secret doors, just secret doors.
So you don't miss anything.
Yeah, well, so you don't miss the good stuff. You can still miss the bad stuff. When you do encounter a trap, you will have advantage on saving throws made to avoid or resist its effects. If the trap does manage to damage you, you will have resistance on whatever damage is dealt by the trap. And that part sounds pretty good. But again, I'm not running into that many traps. All the traps that I'm running into don't necessarily deal damage as much as put you in an awkward situation. Again, your mileage may vary. Your DM might really be a dungeon crawl trap guy, in which case this might be great. The final point on Dungeon Delver is that traveling at a fast pace does not impose the normal -5 penalty to your perception score. So you can walk through that dungeon as fast as you want and still have a look around without suffering the negative effects of doing so.
Your passive perception score.
I'm sorry, yes, your passive perception.
So, yeah, and I think you're kind of talking yourself into this one a little bit. But I'm kind of in the same boat that I don't play in a lot of trap-heavy games in my week-to-week, and I don't really run trap-heavy games. You know, they haven't come out with Mordenkainen's Tome of Traps yet. And there's a lot more interesting monsters out there in the world that give great roleplay opportunities and interactions and unique scenarios as opposed to just something that is put out there to sneakily chip away at your party's hit points. So traps aren't a big deal for me.
Here's the thing. I don't know if I'm talking myself into it, really. I'm just recognizing that there is a certain sort of DM whose players might want to consider this. But even in that circumstance, if you have a DM who really likes dungeon crawls and really likes traps, then you can decide to take this feat. But traps are usually just put in place in order to tax your resources so that you don't have as many of them for the encounters that the DM has designed. If your DM is throwing a whole bunch of them at you for these dungeons that you've been in the past, then maybe you want to pick up this feat. But after that, it's really just betting on what's coming more so than it is protecting you from what you have already experienced. By taking this feat, you're saying, I bet my DM is going to hit me with a ton of traps. Like, maybe if you were about to go into, say, the Tomb of Annihilation, you would think, you know what, the Dungeon Delver feat is going to be one that I definitely take. But if you don't know that something like this is coming, I just can't see myself not taking a better feat or an ASI.
Yes, and actually, my rogue is probably going to take this feat who's in the Tomb of Annihilation campaign by the time he actually gets around to going there. But that's an interesting point you bring up. You're betting that this situation is going to come up in the game. With a lot of other feats, with better designed feats, I would say, they are in your power as to how effective they are going to be. But your player character cannot create secret doors or traps or whatnot. So it really is, and I hadn't considered this before you started talking about it, out of your hands how useful this feat's going to be.
Right. Let's compare it to the actor feat that you mentioned earlier. The actor feat you saw as being particularly valuable because you can engineer a scenario as a player and as a character where you could solve some problems with it. Whereas the Dungeon Delver feat, you're just reacting to what you think the DM has in store for you. Like I said, you're kind of just playing upon your past experiences and assuming what's coming. The very first feature where it says you have advantage on perception checks and investigation checks to find secret doors, as a player, you have no idea how many secret doors you've walked past. It could be dozens, and now you will finally see them because you've taken the feat, or it could be 0. And you would never know the difference.
Now I'm going to find all the secret doors that aren't here.
Yeah, exactly. You'll find all 0 secret doors. I don't like this feat because I feel like when presented with the opportunity to take it, almost anything would be a better choice. The only exception is when you know for certain that this sort of thing is in your future.
There are certainly games out there that preserve that older style of campaign where you go to the dungeon, you explore the dungeon, you map the dungeon, you kill the things that are inside, and you take their stuff back with you to town. And when that is the theme of your campaign, when that's the kind of thing your player characters do, it is great to be the Dungeon Delver guy. Mm-hmm. But again, in all the campaigns you've played in and the campaigns that I've played in, this is kind of an afterthought, and it's not something that you can make more effective by intention. And kind of with the lucky feat, I feel like it's something that you take out of fear. And that's actually going to show up again in my bottom 5 is if you're taking a feat not because you're excited to do something, but because you're scared of something happening to you, I think you're coming at this from the wrong angle.
You know, I'm going to make one more point before we move on, based on something that you just said, which is I don't think that the sort of play style that Dungeon Delver is meant to facilitate is emphasized in 5th edition.
Yeah.
I think that this is a holdover feat from previous editions, which emphasized this sort of dungeon crawl experience. And 5th edition just emphasizes different things. It emphasizes role play. It emphasizes heroism. It enables you to craft a narrative. And a lot of the modules that it contains are more about story than attrition. And I've mentioned that I think that it would be useful for a module like Tomb of Annihilation, but I'm pretty sure without checking this out that Tomb of Annihilation is a rewrite of a campaign from an older edition.
Mm-hmm. Actually, most of the 5th edition modules are.
Right. I mean, I know like Curse of Stratas and stuff, but I think that this is specifically in here as a throwback, and that they have just made a lot more feats that are specifically useful to the edition that they are appearing in.
And forgive me if I am stepping on toes of something that's going to be on one of your lists later, but I think Dungeon Delver is probably useful in the same kind of game that Durable is useful in. And something that is gritty, and something that's in that older style that you were talking about, where it's a resource management game and every hit point is precious, and you're just trying to survive.
Well, it's a good thing you mentioned it, because I will not be talking about Durable for the rest of this.
Nor will I.
Okay. All right, so moving on to my next pick for good feats, for empirically, mechanically beneficial feats.
My body is ready.
There are 2 feats which allow you to impose a penalty upon your attack roll to then add a bonus to your damage. Those 2 are Great Weapon Master for melee martial characters and Sharpshooter for ranged martial characters. Of the 2, Sharpshooter is empirically better because it grants you additional things that you can do with that feat. And so Sharpshooter is on my list.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Are you surprised?
Only that you have good taste for once. Sharpshooter is also on my top 5.
There you go. I feel like it's a shoe-in fit for a martial ranged character. The Sharpshooter feat, for those of you who don't know, says that you have mastered ranged weapons and can make shots that others would find impossible. First off, attacking at long range no longer imposes disadvantage on your ranged weapon attack rolls, which any weapon that is capable of attacking at range is going to have 2 numbers next to it, and those numbers are its normal attack range and its long attack range. A distance to your target that is below the first number will be a normal attack roll, and if the distance is between the first number and the second number, you can still make the attack. It's not impossible, but it is normally done at disadvantage. This feat completely ignores that. Also, your ranged weapons ignore half cover and 3/4 cover, which we had the better part of a whole episode talking about how awesome cover was and all of the different benefits that you could normally gain by employing it. Once again, sharpshooters don't care. And then finally, the aforementioned ability to take a -5 to your attack roll to gain a +10 to the attack's damage if it hits. All 3 of these aspects of this feat are great. The Great Weapon Master, which is again the melee equivalent to the Sharpshooter feat, only has 2 features included in it, and I would argue that the second one that it gets isn't as good as either of the 2 that the Sharpshooter feat gets. I personally like this because it allows you to take away all the disadvantages of being a ranged combatant while keeping all of the pros. I mean, do we need to have an episode about why being able to attack at range is good? I feel like that part's self-explanatory, and all of the normal drawbacks associated with that are largely ignored by the Sharpshooter feat.
Yeah, the only thing that's really left out is shooting in melee, when the enemy has closed the gap and is bothering you in your face, which there is a feat that does handle that.
Yes, there is.
But really,
yes, there is.
Everything else, Sharpshooter has got you. Of course, Great Weapon Master doesn't need to ignore cover. You're in melee, but it's something that ranged combatants do and should have to contend with on the regular. And ignoring everything but full cover is pretty huge. I like this not just from the mechanical standpoint, though, but because it makes you the sniper guy. It lets you fill that niche. While all of your friends are up in melee, you're a country mile away raining down hot death from a longbow or a short bow or a heavy crossbow. It gives you a button to push. It lets you make that decision of whether more damage is needed right now or if you really just need to make sure that you hit. It's a great tool for rogues, for rangers, for fighters, or certain kinds of bard, and really does turn you into the Robin Hood archetype, the Hawkeye archetype, the Bullseye archetype. The guy who, when you put a bow in his hands or a crossbow in his hands, he doesn't miss, and he can do things with that bow that will shock, astound, and surprise you, if only for the last few moments of your life.
Did you mention Legolas? Because, I mean, I'm getting very strong Legolas vibes from Sharpshooter.
Sure, I did. Of course, Legolas.
If you could, throw 2 or 3 arrows on there while you're doing this, then you'd basically be Legolas. And that's kind of what you do when you get extra attacks. Mechanically speaking, Sharpshooter is just so strong. And the last bit is a really thinky one. The one where you take a penalty to your attack roll in order to get more damage. I had to do a little research onto whether or not that is worth it. And obviously it's going to change a little bit depending on what your attack bonus is, what level you are, and what the AC of your opponent is. But there are people out there who have done the research, who have compared the ACs across all of the enemies in the game, and they have done the math on, what it would take to get a +10 to your damage under other situations. A +10, on average, is like adding a D10 and a D8 to your damage roll if you hit. Because, the average roll on a D10 is 5.5, rounded up to 6, and the average roll on a D8 is 4.5, usually rounded up to 5. So it's adding some pretty chunky dice to your weapon damage roll.
Like a Divine Smite.
Yeah. And this -5 penalty that you take, first off, is usually not that bad. You kind of know after a shot or two whether the enemy that you're targeting has a high AC and whether or not this is going to be worth it. But against a low AC enemy, this is almost like taking multiple attacks. And this is not to mention the fact that there are so many ways that you can engineer advantage on a shot. And I am told by people who know math that having advantage is like having a +5 to hit, mathematically speaking. So if you can make yourself have advantage on a sharpshooter shot, then you are basically negating the penalty and keeping the extra damage.
Oh yeah, on my rogue with this feat, if I know that the AC of the target I'm trying to kill is less than 20 and I have advantage on the shot, I'm pressing that button. I'm taking that penalty and I'm bringing whatever it is down as quickly as I possibly can.
It's just good. If you are a ranged martial fighter, sharpshooter is, for me, an auto-include, and I definitely think that it should be somewhere on your list. Maybe you don't take it at level 4, but I would strongly consider it for my 8th or 12th level choices, and if you're a fighter, I mean, get it before level 8 for sure.
No arguments here. You, like I said, for a change, you have good taste.
We agreed on something!
Yeah.
I don't expect that to happen much more as we go through these.
So, I guess that'll count as my good thing as well, or else it's going to throw off our little system. So, shall I just move on to something I don't like?
Yes, go ahead. Complain away.
Alright. I don't like Eldritch Adept.
Alright, there may be some more overlap after all. You may not have good taste, but at least you don't have bad taste.
So, Eldritch Adept, first of all, requires you to already be a spellcaster. No pure martial classes are going to take this. And arguably, I think maybe they would have been some of the ones who might have been most interested in it. But we'll get there. It says that through studying occult lore, you've unlocked eldritch power within yourself. You learn an eldritch invocation from the warlock class that you must meet the prerequisites for. And you can replace it as needed when you level up. Here's why this is so bad.
How bad is it?
All of the cool warlock invocations that you would really want have prerequisites. So you're not going to be able to get like the really juicy ones. You just are allowing yourself access to the starter level, like entry level ones. And they're not bad, and some of them are quite cool, actually. But are they as good as multiclassing into Warlock? Are they as good as an ability score improvement? I don't think so.
No, honestly, I have a hard time with any of the feats that say Adept. Because I feel like, I mean, this might be a whole bag of worms, but I feel like the Adept, quote-unquote, feats are designed to give you a taste of another playstyle or to enable aspects of another playstyle that you otherwise wouldn't have access to without multiclassing. But the problem with all of them is that they do not give you enough of that resource in order to make it useful. Now, in the case of Eldritch Adept, it gives you an Eldritch Invocation, which is the coolest thing about being a warlock for me, hands down.
Sure, yeah.
But it only gives you one, and I could forgive that. But once again, there are just so many restrictions on this. For one, the prerequisite, you have to have the ability to cast spells or have the Pact Magic feature in order to get this. That shuts down a couple of that shuts a couple of characters out by default.
That shuts down fighters and monks and rogues and barbarians.
Yes, but the one that really gets me is this little line here in the middle where it says, if the invocation has a prerequisite of any kind, you can choose that invocation only if you're a warlock who meets the prerequisite. Not, you can choose that invocation only if you meet the prerequisite. You specifically have to be a warlock who meets that prerequisite.
Which, to be fair, the prerequisites generally are saying that you have to be a warlock of a certain level, or that you have to be a warlock of a certain pact. So that's kind of to be expected, but it does limit my interest in this feat.
But again, this is supposed to enable a Warlock playstyle without being a Warlock. Because if you want Eldritch Invocations, take 2 levels of Warlock and you get 2. So why then would I take Eldritch Adept to just get 1 feat? Because, okay, what is the coolest spell that a Warlock can cast?
I mean, Eldritch Blast.
Did you know that the invocations Agonizing Blast, Eldritch Spear, Grasp of Hadar, Lance of Lethargy, and Repelling Blast all focus on and augment the Eldritch Blast cantrip, and that the being able to cast the Eldritch Blast cantrip is a prerequisite in order to take them.
Ah, I see where you're going with this.
Mm-hmm. These are some really cool invocations, and I almost always take 1 as any Warlock that I play. But if I take the Eldritch Adept feat in order to emulate that style of play that I would take as a Warlock, I can't take it. Because that line, rules as written, says I can choose that invocation only if I am a Warlock who meets that prerequisite. I could take another feat to emulate being a Warlock and having the Eldritch Invocation feat, which is really, this is just kind of an ass backwards way to do it. But I could get myself the Eldritch Blast cantrip by taking various feats, and then I could take Eldritch Adept to give myself, say, Agonizing Blast in order to augment it. But now I've taken 2 feats where I could have just taken 2 levels of Warlock and gotten all that and more.
So this was initially part of my problem with all of the Adept feats, until I realized that what I was actually thinking of were the Initiate feats. The Initiate feats are meant to give you a taste of something else. Like if you want to be a magic initiate for a wizard or for a bard, you get a couple of cantrips and a spell from their list. Or maybe it's 2 spells. I don't remember.
It's 2 cantrips and 1 spell, and it is the Magic Initiate feat. You can dip your toes into what it's like to be a cleric or a different spellcaster of your choice, because it is any other spellcast of your choice without getting any of their class features.
So that's what the Initiate feat is for, is to dip your toe into something. I dislike all of the Adept feats. I mean, all of them. But this one in particular, because it was so restrictive. But I realized that's not actually what the Adept feats are for. Adept and Initiate are pretty much antonyms. The Adept feat is to put you a cut above the rest of the people who can do the thing you do. As an Eldritch Initiate, this is meant for Warlocks, to get them an invocation leg up on all other Warlocks. They are an Eldritch Adept. But I just don't think it's reason enough. You get quite a good amount of invocations as you level up through the Warlock list. Unless you're just really in a hurry for a low-level character concept to be able to have unlocked a certain power, I don't know that you take this one.
Yeah, so if you played all the way to 20th level, you would get just organically 8 invocations. And you could get as many as 4, half of the maximum number that you could otherwise have by level 7. And these invocations are really good, and I could see a character wanting more, and maybe if you know that this campaign is only going to last till level 8 or level 9, that maybe you just go ahead and take this feat so you can get that 1 more before the campaign ends. That's a conversation. I would hear someone out on why they would want to do that sort of thing. But out of all the different Adept abilities, the ones that you take as the class that it was designed for in order to further augment it, this one's pretty low on my list.
And you know what? I could maybe forgive it if I could take this feat multiple times. And I could be the Eldritch Invocation guy and just have twice as many Eldritch Invocations, or half again as many as every other Warlock out there. But you can only take an individual feat a single time unless the text specifically says otherwise, and this one does not. So it's losing an ability score improvement for just 1 more Eldritch Invocation. And no Eldritch Invocation springs to mind that is so important that it makes me overlook all other feats and an ability score improvement to make me get this one.
Even as the class that these were designed for, I have a hard time thinking that these are in general worth it, with the exception of Metamagic Adept, which I fully intend to take as my sorcerer. the fact that you can so significantly increase the number of metamagics known with that feat is pretty significant. Unlike warlocks and their invocations, sorcerers of max level get, I want to say, 4 metamagics in total. So the fact that you can take Metamagic Adept and increase that number by 50% up to 6 total is insane. Plus, you can do this at very early levels, as early as level 4 or level 8. So you can really increase the number of metamagics that you know, and that's the big selling point for the sorcerer.
Yeah, there's a very limited number of metamagic options. There's only 8? So you go from knowing half of them to knowing 75% of them?
Well, actually, with Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, we are now up to 11 possible metamagics.
Ooh.
So a 20th level sorcerer will only ever know about 35% of all possible metamagics. With this feat, that 20th level sorcerer can get up to around 53%. So it is a substantial increase. And again, I don't assume that most of your characters, most of those sorcerers out there, are going to be 20th level. So taking your 4th level character up from 2 to 4 gets you as many metamagics as a 20th level sorcerer at level 4 with this feat. And it gives you some extra sorcery points on top of that, which is just like a bonus. So Metamagic Adept is definitely not good enough to make my top 5, but I am going to take it, and it's really the only adept feat that I will argue for.
Frankly, metamagic is so cool. Just the ability to twin a spell or to make a careful spell is huge. And a wizard who can careful spell their fireball, that's something. And even if they can only do it a couple of times, the ability for another class to play with metamagic is so significant, I'm not going to argue. And I like that while other Adept features kind of give you a watered down version, that Metamagic Adept is giving you pretty much the real deal. A Battlemaster fighter who takes the Martial Adept does not get to increase the size of his superiority die as he increases in levels. The superiority die that he gets from the feat will always be a d6. And it's just going to be 1. But a sorcery point is a sorcery point is a sorcery point. And while the number increases, its effectiveness will remain whether you're 4th level or 14th level.
Yeah. And now, it is kind of a bummer that some choices that a non-sorcerer could make with Metamagic Adept aren't really feasible. You know, like, some of those metamagics cost so much that 2 sorcery points just ain't going to cut it for the thing that you want to do. Like, for instance, Twin Spell. You could not twin haste as a Metamagic Adept, regardless of whether you knew the haste spell. But a sorcerer, with their normal pool of sorcery points, is not limited in such a way. And I strongly recommend that in this post-Tasha's world in which we live in, all sorcerers consider this feat. That's about as much as I want to talk about any feat that didn't actually make one of our top 5s or bottom 5s. But I just like Metamagic Adept so much that I couldn't not mention it as I made the blanket statement against all the other Adept feats.
Hello there, friends and adventurers. It's Rob, the D&D wannabe, here to tell you that we talked about feats for a long time during this recording session. In fact, it got too long for us to really feel like putting it into a single episode. Or too long for us to want to sit down and edit all of that in one go. Take your pick. So, we've split our feats discussion into 2 separate episodes. This marks the end of the first one, obviously, and the second one will be coming out in a couple of weeks to conclude our top 5 and bottom 5 lists and mine and Steve's comparison of them. We look forward to sharing that experience with you and continuing this conversation very soon. Until next time.
The outro music you're listening to right now is called Mega Epic, and the intro music is called Super Epic. Both were composed by the wonderfully talented Alexander Nakarada and utilized under a Creative Commons license. You can find more of his music at serpentsoundstudios.com. If you enjoyed our content, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and review on your listening app of choice. To keep up with us on social media, look us up on facebook.com/Bardic Twinspiration and on Twitter @BTwinspiration. Want to interact with us directly? Come join our Discord. After all, who are we if not people who are willing to roll the dice on making some new friends? Links in the description. Come check it out.
Let me go ahead and a little ASMR for you.
I like ASMR, and I like beer, but I don't like ASMR. Ooh, oh! They have Strixhaven feats on here now. I haven't looked at those yet.
Stop.
I bet you they're good. We should probably... Do you think we should start over?
Maybe just another episode about Strixhaven feats.
Maybe we should just do an episode about the new books when they come out. Maybe that's the way to go. Still waiting for you to let me do my Tasha's episode.
Uh-huh.
All right. I'm going to go out of order.
Just don't miss one.
How does the alphabet work again? There it is. It was already pulled up. All right. So moving on to my next pick for good feats, for empirically, mechanically beneficial feats.
Hey everyone, it's Rob, just sneaking here at the end to remind you that this podcast is made possible by Anchor. It's the easiest way to make a podcast. It's free. There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast from your computer or your phone, and they do all the distributing for you. Get heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and other platforms, and you can start making money on your podcast from day one with no minimum listenership. Everything you need to make a podcast is in one place. Go to anchor.fm or download the free Anchor app to get started.